What do you mean?
Canex.
Yes.
Canex is a sugarcane-based roof tile, and it's not toxic, from what I understand. Have you heard otherwise?
Yes.
Oh. Have you heard of this?
So, this is about asbestos.
Yeah.
Okay. This is not about, you know, green things versus non-green things. This is just asbestos. Hazardous waste and toxic substances, if your client finds out that somebody used to repair cars on this property, you might want to ask more questions about that, right? Where exactly did they repair cars? How long did this go on? If your client wants to consider soil testing is very expensive, just so you know that. You know, a couple of $1,000s to test 3 spots or 4 spots. So my recommendation is if there was a car, you know, parked here, and you can see sometimes the old cars are still there, right? And they have to remove the old cars, and you go, oh boy. I had a couple that bought a 5-acre farm up in Kula, and it had these mounds of the green, and we go, we think there's something under those mounds, right? And sure enough, we go there and dig around, and there's cars under there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that for a Google search, and there were like 12 cars on a property.
Oh yeah, this is not
And it
uncommon.
made sense where the green humps were.
Yes, totally, yeah. So, he wanted soil testing, and I got him a quote for soil testing. He says, oh, no, I don't want to spend that kind of money. And he goes, well, what do? I want to run an organic farm here. And I go, well, it's kind of contained right here. Why don't you put a pond, right? Why don't you put a water pond right here and let your animals come and get the water here, right? But use a tub thing so that it isn't exposed, right? So, yeah, or buy a liner, do a pond with a liner, and that's what they did.
Miriam, just to answer, the Canex, which is a sugar cane roofing that's real common in plantation houses, has embedded arsenic, but it doesn't, and it's biostable, so it's embedded in the material, and it doesn't have any asbestos, unless it was added after.
A little arsenic keeps the rats away. Wastewater disposal. That buyer's disclosure also talks about wastewater disposal. So in this particular instance, I would guess that this is a cesspool, not a septic system. Not that I'm interested in finding this out right now. But being able to talk about that and tell people so there's some information in that buyer's disclosure. There's also, just go to Valley Isle Pumping's website. They have a wonderful description of what is a cesspool and what to do with it, and what is a septic tank and what to do with it, and encourage your clients to have it inspected. And if you do have a septic or cesspool that your client is buying, I saw this recently and I thought this is brilliant. Why didn't I ever think of this? You write it into the contract that the seller shall uncover the clean out. So that you're not the one doing this, because I've had my son out there digging with me. We've gone around looking for things because the pumping companies don't like to do this, and they're going to charge you an arm and a leg if you need to find the cesspool. So have it dug up by the seller. What the heck? Write it right into the contract. Seller shall, uncover the cesspool clean out.
And what did you say, Valley Isle Pumping?
Valley Isle Pumping, yeah. Otherwise known as Suck 'em Up. I think they bought Suck 'em Up is what happened. We used to have both, right? Okay, so that's hazardous waste and toxic substances. Most of that would be car battery acid and gasoline and car oil and that kind of thing. I don't know what else. Arsenic in your ceiling tiles could be, I suppose, considered that if you, right? However, you'd have to make a case that, like, somebody's gonna look it up and say it's not friable. And if it's not friable, then it's not an issue. Does everybody remember that term, friable, from their test? It's anything that's airborne, it's called it's friable, right? So. Mold disclosure, I just tell people, you're moving to Maui, we have mold. Period. It's not that you don't have mold in Kihei or Lahaina. That's not true. The humidity factor is 65 to 70% here at any given time, and you're gonna have mold everywhere. So, just be aware of that. The second thing I've mentioned to people is if you're gonna buy one of these new homes that's hermetically sealed, these mainland homes that they're building here, right? You're gonna have to make sure you've got air circulation happening. So if you take a listing and the listing is vacant and you don't want it to get moldy, run the air conditioner twice a day. Literally, put the air conditioner on a timer if you can, to have it turn on a couple of times a day. Airflow, I now keep a fan going in several rooms at all times, and boy, has it made a difference. The moment I turn it off. So I just, airflow and light. That's the other one. My cleaning closet, I keep the light on at all times, makes all the difference.
That kind of light, not sunlight?
Yeah, any kind, no, it's about the heat.
Yeah, the heat from the bulb.
It's the heat from the bulb that actually makes the difference. I think the light also does, but I think the heat from the bulb. So you just get these little ways, right, that we all learn as we live
Those
here.
air dryers just have a light bulb in them.
Sex offender, just so you know, if you're interested in that, you can find a website about that information, or you can contact the police. I have no information about that. Flood zone, I've looked up the property on the flood zone map, and here it is. It's not in a flood zone, whatever you wanna talk about there. Lead-based paint, prior to 1978, lead-based paint addendum would apply. And this simply says that,
I don't know where it is. Sorry. Okay.
this simply says that lead-based paint remediation is a big deal, right? It's another one of those toxic, and they're gonna cover the whole house, and people go in hazmat suits to remove. So getting lead-based paint testing, I don't think is anywhere near as expensive as soil testing, can be done. Climate change and natural hazards. Okay, let's not get into whether or not you believe in climate change, that's not the point here. We are here to tell you that we have, major shore erosion going on, and we have hurricanes here. So please be aware, this is particularly only of concern to somebody buying oceanfront property, right? You're gonna have to be honest with them about that. And, yeah, we have hurricanes. And then the final one is about wired and transferred funds, and so this is just, there's been a lot of fraud on the internet, including in real estate, so just be aware that nobody's going to give you transfer funds information in an email. Escrow, and I'm not gonna do it. You're not gonna ever hear me tell you anything about where to transfer your funds to. It will come from escrow in a secure access. You're gonna have to log in. So just be aware to not follow any other instructions except those. All right, here's our general inspection, and I read this with people. I literally say, at buyer's sole cost and expense, buyer shall have the right to personally or by an expert or professional, A, inspect the property and any portion thereof, B, inspect all major appliances and fixtures, and C, inspect all public records relating to the property and its use, and D, review all matters concerning the property, including those above. So this is your chance, and you're gonna have 14 days to fully inspect this. At the end of the 14 days, you have the right to cancel this transaction, or if at any time you decide to cancel, you have the right to cancel, and we have to give no reason. So whatever your reason is for canceling, it's fine. However, after these 14 days, that right is gone. So you're gonna have 14 days to do all your inspections, okay? The next one is J3, that's final walkthrough, and we say that 5 days prior to closing, the buyer has a right to inspect the property and expect it to be in the same condition it was in during the inspection. Now, some people say, well, my lawn wasn't mowed when you did the inspection, so why should I mow the lawn now?
Oh my God, Patty.
Yeah, people do get petty sometimes. And then in J4, we talk about withheld collected funds for repairs or maintenance, and this says, if there's any funds being held, we want them paid out at closing. We don't want this going on forever kind of thing. It just makes it easier on the lender too.
Gwen,
Yes.
can you give me a hand? Thanks.
And then, it's nice to give people existing warranties and plans. This is the stuff that's in the kitchen drawer, you know, the kitchen drawer that's got all the manuals in it and stuff like that. If you're taking over new appliances, be sure to get the receipts for those appliances. Can't do anything without the receipts. Goodbye, Carol, good to see you.
Good to see you. Nice to meet all of you.
Number 8 says items shall be removed from the property at 6 days, right? So if you change the final walkthrough to 4 days and this to 5 days, that's okay with me. You can't do it, you don't wanna do it less than that. People are not gonna be willing to sign their loan documents without doing a walkthrough. They're not. It's gonna make them feel really uncomfortable if the walkthrough isn't completed and the house isn't in good condition. So just be aware of that. The second thing to be aware of on J3 also defaults to acceptance if you do not extend it. So if at J3, your final walkthrough, your buyer says, well, I'm not satisfied with this cleaning and I want you to, you know, redo this and redo that, and you didn't make this repair and you didn't make that repair, and the seller says, okay, I'll get all that done before closing. The buyer might say, that's okay, but I'd really like to see it again. So I'm gonna come 2 days before closing. So in 3 days, I'm gonna come. So I'm gonna give you 3 days to fix this. And then have another walkthrough. You must extend the final walkthrough. Otherwise, the listing agent is gonna tell you, say, oh no, final walkthrough's done. This is just a courtesy. There's no more recourse, okay? And do people pull that card? You bet they do, all the time.
Can you just repeat that again? J3 falls to
Acceptance.
if
So-
you don't extend it.
If you don't extend it. So like I just explained, your buyer goes to J3 and it's not cleaned properly and there's a repair that they agreed to make and they didn't make it. So now you say to them, okay, you've got 3 more days. I'm gonna come back 2 days before closing and make sure this is done right. So I'm going to extend my final walkthrough until 2 days before closing. You, the agent, must put that in writing and get the seller to agree to that.
So you just get a piece of paper and put it
No,
in
it's
there?
called a contingency extension form in our intranet. So you can just go to get a contingency extension form and fill it out and get the buyer to sign it and get the seller to sign it on that day, because if it goes to 11:59 p.m., it's accepted. All right, so the idea here is that removal of items from the property and cleaning should be done the day before your final walkthrough, right? So if your final walkthrough is at 5 days, here, 5 days, then the cleaning and removal of items has to be done at 6 days, right? The day before. Pet treatment is done by the termite companies, and it's done after the carpet is shampooed. I know that sounds odd, but that's what they do. So they vacuum everything up that they can, clean the carpet, and then they spray it with this stuff, and you don't wanna walk on it. You wanna let it be. So that's why it's done very, very late, very much at the end. It's like, if you've got another walkthrough at 2 days before, make sure you don't have a pet treatment before that. You go before the pet treatment. You don't wanna walk on the wet carpet. Staking and survey, what's the difference between a staking and a survey? Anybody know?
Survey is more detailed, complete.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's got a map. You actually get a piece of paper with a map. A staking, you just get stakes in the ground. So, sometimes those things are negotiable. If somebody can provide a survey and say, here, I've got a survey from a couple of years ago, and I'll just have the property restaked so you can see where the pins are. So, That's kind of how we do that. And we have that filled out for the survey to be completed 25 days after acceptance. So depending on where your closing date is, that should work. The next section is about boundary encroachments. So if your survey finds a boundary encroachment, what do? Well, the first thing that happens is that the buyer doesn't have to do anything except decide what they want to have done. It's the buyer who gets to decide, do I want that fence moved or removed, or do I want an encroachment agreement with the neighbor? And so whatever they want is what you now communicate to the seller, and it's now the seller's obligation to do that. Now the seller might say, I'm not removing the fence, not doing it, sorry, you can cancel the contract, I don't care. And so the buyer goes, oh, okay, well then, how about an encroachment agreement? And he goes, okay, let me see what I can do. And now, oftentimes, the listing agent ends up being the one who goes to the neighbor and says, we've got this little encroachment over here, and you know, it's kind of encroaching on your land, and we'd like an encroachment agreement. He goes, well, why don't you just move the fence? Well, the seller isn't willing to move the fence. Well, I don't care, but I don't want an encroachment agreement for a silly fence. Just move your fence. So sometimes I'm just giving you the kind of examples of what can happen, and you're kind of stuck in the middle, and we have to figure it out. We just have to figure it out. Go back to the seller and say, neighbor doesn't want an encroachment agreement, he says move your fence. So this isn't terribly expensive. Let me find out what it would cost. It's 5 fence posts that need to be moved in. That's the extent. Let's find out what it would cost to do this. And you find out, and you get the quote, and you go, okay, we can move the fence, and it'll cost you $800. I don't want to spend $800. And you just go down that road. You just have to deal with it, yeah?
Okay.
You just have to, like, they're all grown up, they're adults, you're getting a lot of money for this property, so $800 to make the buyer happy and make this go to closing is totally worth it. Let's just get it done. Sometimes I also let people stew for 24 hours. Let them get upset, be upset, and then, why don't you think about it, I'll call you in the morning. And then you contact them again, and he goes, yeah, okay, fine. And people calm down, right? We all know that. You breathe a little, you take a nap, have a sleep, and you wake up and you go, yeah, it's not such a big deal.
And you think about the money too, right?
Well, oh, for
Or maybe,
sure,
yeah,
for
yeah.
sure. But you'd be surprised. You will run into all sorts of people doing all sorts of things. So then it says, if nobody's willing to fix the encroachment, then the buyer can decide up until 7 days before closing if they want to accept the property with the encroachments as is. Can you do that? Sure. The fence has been there for years and years and years, and the neighbors never complain. Neighbor's not going to complain now. But sure, I'll take it with the fence. The only thing that's going to happen is that the title company is not going to insure the buyer on that fence. If the neighbor comes and claims and wants the fence moved, it's going to be on the buyer, not on title insurance, right? Okay. Termite inspection. Our termite inspection is written so that within 7 days, and on the first line, see the 2 pukas here, either buyer or seller shall decide which company to use for a termite inspection. And then the termite report is to be delivered 14 days before closing, and the reason it's filled in that way is because a termite report is only good for 2 weeks. So they do the termite inspection on the 15th day and provide the report on the 14th day before closing. Most of the time we have the seller pay for the termite inspection, and this is, I'm kind of surprised it's not. You can just say here, you hit your space bar, and you just put market rate for the cost of the, whatever cost, you gotta cover it, Mr. Seller. I'm not gonna try and guesstimate what the cost of a termite inspection is, right? Just say market rate. These are the lower pukas in L2. Next section is your documents, mandatory provision of documents. And most people leave this checked even when a subdivision doesn't have, like older subdivisions, don't have documents. And at this point, most of those documents can be found, for older subdivisions, can be found on the title report. It'll come with the title report. Where it doesn't is newer subdivisions where the CC&Rs are this big, right? Kailani, all the areas here, all this new stuff has major CC&Rs. If you've got a client buying in there, I urge you to recommend to that client that they have an attorney review those. And you get that set up as early as possible to get an attorney to do that. Attorneys have paralegals who do that for them, and most of them are familiar with the various subdivisions, and they know which documents to look at. I can guarantee you that a buyer is not gonna read this, and a seller isn't gonna read this. They're just not gonna do it. So Kailani has incredible CC&Rs. You're not allowed to put up a gazebo unless it matches the design of the house. Really? Like, really? Yes, and that, who knew? Nobody knows that. So you buy one of the gazebos from Costco, it's adorable, you put it up, and lo and behold, a year later, it says you can't have a gazebo up there. I got caught in one of those. So I've gotten caught several times in Kailani CC&R, so I'm just warning you.
Is Kailani one of the Maui developments?
It's the whole thing, I call it the whole thing, right? The whole thing, all of this new stuff over here has major CC&Rs,
Oh,
major. Maui Lani is the old one, Kailani is the new one, everything that goes up the hill, right, in Wailuku, all of that. It's all just a lot of documents, so be sure to check those out. And they have active homeowner associations that enforce the rules. So, we ask for the documents to be provided to the buyer within 7 days of acceptance. They have 3 days to provide a receipt, and they have 10 days to review those documents. Again, this is our job to make sure that our buyer gets these and has the time to review them or gets them to an attorney, right? And then if the deal falls apart, we agree to return the documents 5 days after canceling. And this says that we agree to receive the documents in all these forms. Sometimes I get a little cheeky and I go, nope, I don't want hard copy. Do not be giving me hard copy, I don't want it. So I take that one out. But they're all filled in because, you know, you might get some old CC&Rs from a smaller condo or something like that that's in paper. Rental matters, N1 is delivery of possession of the property without tenants, and number 2 is tenant documents. So if you want to take the tenants, you would check number 2, and it's filled in with, you're going to get the rental documents within 7 days, and the buyer is going to have 7 days to review them. N3 says that the seller agrees not to change anything about rental matters without the buyer's consent. That includes taking vacation rental bookings. So if you have a buyer who wants the vacation rental bookings to continue, you would need to put it in writing that N3 should not apply. The way that works most easily is if the buyer agrees to take on the same management company. If the condo, vacation rental condo, is being marketed through Airbnb and VRBO, you're not going to be able to take bookings after closing. So just don't do anything. Just make the seller stop, because you can't transfer those. All right, and then we get to our termination provisions. Our termination provisions are simply the explanation of if you terminate due to default, right? If the buyer doesn't perform on time, the seller gets to cancel and gets to keep the money. Now that isn't so easy because escrow can't release the money until buyer and seller agree, and the buyer's not going to agree to let their money go. So sometimes they end up in a little stalemate, but for sure the seller has a right to cancel. It's our job to make sure that we never let that happen, that the seller has a right to cancel, especially in the times when a market has backup offers. If your seller, this listing, has a backup offer and the seller's just waiting for this buyer to make a mistake and miss a deadline, they're gonna cancel instantly. And you're gonna go, oh, please, please, please don't cancel, I made a mistake, I'm so sorry, oh please, I'm in so much trouble. Sorry, we've got a backup offer. You wanna pay $10,000 more? We'll keep you. I've had that happen, where I represented the seller. It's tough, but when the seller says, go, I want that more money, that's what you have to do. So it's our job to keep everything going. The second one says, if the seller defaults and the buyer hasn't defaulted, what are the buyer's remedies? Well, the buyer can actually also cancel, but he can also sue for performance. Because the only way the buyer really defaults is by not signing documents, right? If the buyer doesn't get you the survey in time, you go, come on, get me the survey, right? Whatever. Are you gonna cancel because he didn't get you the survey? Probably not. But if he doesn't sign the documents and defaults on selling the property, now the buyer may sue the seller for performance and get the house. Nasty. But it's happened. The next one, Q2 or O2 says within the contingency. So if somebody has a right to cancel and they cancel, everything's fine. Everybody cancels, money is returned, everything's okay, no issue. And the third one is, well, some spots are a little soft. So if you didn't get me the inclusions for all the items that are included with the sale within the 7 days that I asked for, I actually can give you another 5 days before I can cancel. So here's how this goes. So the buyer says, why isn't the seller giving us this information? I don't know, the listing agent is working on it. So I call the listing agent again and say, okay, so it was due today, you can't get it to me today, when can you get me this list? Oh, I'll get it to you in 2 days, I promise. And 2 days go by, and no list. And so the buyer goes, really? Let's try one more time. And you call the listing agent again and say, look, the buyer's getting really antsy about this and is not feeling comfortable and is thinking about canceling if you don't get me this list. Oh, this buyer can't cancel. Oh, yes, we can. We have O3 on the delivery of this list. And so another day goes by and there's no list, and the buyer says, I don't want to deal with this seller. I don't trust this seller. The seller can't even get me a list of what's included. How am I going to trust anything they say? Let's cancel and find another condo. Now that's likely to happen not in this market, because there ain't no other condo, but in a market where there's a lot of condos and a lot of choices, right? And now the buyer has the upper hand and can say, I'm not putting up with this. I'm leaving. So the buyer literally had 5 extra days to kind of let it happen. This is the same contingency that applies for financing for the seller. If the buyer doesn't perform his financing duties, the seller can cancel at any time based on O3, meaning there's those extra 5 days. So it's important for you to be aware of this, because after the 5th day, your seller no longer has a right to cancel. So you must exercise that right to cancel within those 5 days that the O3 gives us. So let's say the buyer doesn't provide final loan approval on time, and final loan approval is late, and your seller says final loan approval is late, they haven't requested an extension. You'd be shocked to see how many people don't request extensions in writing. Terrible, terrible habit. It goes along, and let's say your seller wants out. You need to make sure you manage those 5 days and go, okay, today's the 4th day, tomorrow's your last day to cancel this contract based on the fact that they haven't delivered final loan approval or conditional loan approval, whatever it is. So again, the seller, you need to be aware of what your O3 days are and which contingencies fall under O3. And you go, well, how do I do that? And I go, yeah, well, you ask your broker, for sure. There aren't a lot, but just know that for the seller, the entire financing contingency falls under O3. That's a really good one to know. Just be aware of. All right. Buyer and seller agree to consider mediation. They're not obligated to do it. And the Realtors Association, of course, provides mediation. And they will also consider, they agree in good faith to attempt to settle such a dispute via mediation. And the same is true for arbitration. They will consider it, but they're not obligated to do either. And that, the last one is about HARPTA FERCTA. Always a good idea to explain to buyers what HARPTA FERCTA means, because people do move off state. And if they move out of state and then go to sell the property, they're gonna owe HARPTA. So it's always a good thing to point out HARPTA FERCTA. So on HARPTA, there's a 10% withholding until they file their tax returns. And on FERCTA, there's a 15% withholding. Okay? And here is section Q. And section Q is very helpful because it lets us add special terms. And I'm going to show you a little trick here of where there are some pre-written special terms that you can access. So I'm on page 13, and if you just watch here for a second, look up here. Here I am in Q. I'm going to put my cursor there, and when I put my cursor there, I get this little pencil. And I click on the pencil, and then I don't want to change my typeface. I want to click on the little paper, and up comes the clause editor. And I'm in the category for Q, but there are other categories. Look at this. There's for addenda, for the E1 description, for realtor remarks, and for financing. There's clauses in here. Who knew? Look at that. But we're in Q. And then it says, what's the clause title? Look at all these clauses in here. There's a whole bunch of clauses that you can pull on. And one of the ones I like is J1 final walkthrough. Seller agrees to vacate the house and have completely removed all personal and unwanted items from the property and have all cleaning completed prior to the final walkthrough. Could I be a little more clear? Because nothing in the contract requires the house to be vacant for final walkthrough.
You mentioned that the other day.
Okay? So you want to put this clause in. And how do you do that? You hit insert. Bingo! And now I just have to go here. I have to number these and go, this is number 1, and it refers to J8 cleaning, or J3 final walkthrough. So please note that I am naming the paragraph and its title. And the reason I do that is because the buyer and seller don't know what J3 is. And we want to refer to which paragraph we are amending. Isn't that cool?
That is cool.
I think I forgot to mention over here under cleaning, J cleaning, yeah, I did forget this. Notice there's a little box here that says, the seller shall have the entire property professionally cleaned with receipts provided.